2-1. We've reached November. The calendar has turned into the greatest, the most influential, certainly the most consequential time of the year when it comes to college football. We've got a new set of rankings to pour through as we go over the matchups today on the Phil Steele Show. It is the Week 10 edition. ESPN unveiling those college football playoff rankings earlier in the week. We won't discuss really any of the merit behind those numbers, but it gives us more water cooler fodder as we break down these matchups here today on the show. Follow Phil Steele at PhilSteele042. Trip Hurd, my producer and co-host at Trip Hurd. I'm Kyle Schasberger at Kyle Schas. Thank you every single Thursday on College Sports Now, at CS Now Tweets on Twitter for watching the live stream, the Varsity channel on YouTube, and Learfield Audio on Facebook. Of course, you can catch it in podcast form as well. Phil, you are the Ryan Poles of magazine makers. Ryan Poles, general manager for the Chicago Bears, rebuilding a franchise. Much like him, you've already built an empire. You have built the college football Bible equivalent of Preview Magazine. So Poles is just trying to be a lot like you, Phil. But we'll keep it college football. Trust me, there won't be too much Bears talk. How are you feeling coming off of Week 9?
Good. It's should be an exciting month. November is, of course, the main month of the season. It's when it decides who plays in the playoff, decides major bowl games, a lot of big rivalries, and we got a lot of big games this weekend as well.
Trip, how are you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good, especially for a guy who had Iowa State money line last weekend, a guy who had Oklahoma State money line last weekend, and they end up getting beat by 80. But you know what? Those weeks are going to happen. I'm here again. We're ready to turn it around, and that's exactly what we're going to do here for Week 10.
And West Virginia also biting you hard, too. I know a bit, Phil. If you listen to Phil with Wayne Cook and Stephen Hartzell each and every Wednesday in the College Sports Now feed, just go back one episode. Phil will help to peel back the onion a little bit, too. Phil Steele Plus. Go to philsteele.com for more details. Interact with us throughout the program here today to increase your chances and a free subscription of Phil Steele Plus valued at $99. Be more like Phil. You get a peek behind the curtain at all the advanced analytics and stats that Phil uses to help position, handicap these matchups each and every week. Phil, let's go ahead and get started. We've got a couple of games on Thursday night, 3 more on Friday. I think it's 60-plus games from here on out. We're kind of through the bye portion of the schedule. UTEP at Rice will be our first one. 7 o'clock, CBS Sports Network. The last time UTEP came to Rice Stadium, they were riding a 20-game losing streak, and they were 0-8 overall in the year. Yet they were up 34-3 at one point before knocking off the Owls. So the Rice at home, after Charlotte got the Will Healy-less bump, the interim coach bump last week, and absolutely smoked Rice. What do you think of the Owls' chances to bounce back against a UTEP team who is getting 4 points?
You know, I've been impressed with Rice almost all season long. You take a look at the upset of Louisiana, the upset of UAB, beating Louisiana Tech on the road, and coming up just 3 points short against FAU. As you mentioned, had to be the head coach thing with Charlotte. So that was completely unexpected, not only to lose the game, but to get beat 56-23 and get outgained by 144 yards. I like the way TJ McMahon's throwing the football this year. Luke McCaffrey, who came in at QB, is their top wide receiver this year, and that's been a big plus. But I also like what UTEP's doing. I thought if you watch the UTEP Middle Tennessee game, which I'm sure all of our viewers did last week, you know, at the start of the third quarter, UTEP had a wide open 80-yard touchdown pass right in between the numbers, 20 yards behind the defense, and he dropped it. Middle got one of those 74-yard TD passes late. Other than that, it was a pretty even game. I think UTEP can hang with Rice in this one, so I'm going to take UTEP plus the points. They're getting over a field goal.
All right, for the next game on Thursday night or tonight, it's 7:30 kick with App State and Coastal, and this is the game that I'm interested in because I actually think App State is the better team here. They're laying a field goal on the road, but their running game's getting healthy again. They've got Nate Noel and Cam Peoples kind of back in action, and I think they're going to go over the 63.5, and I think they're going to cover that field goal, unless you talk me out of it here, Phil.
I'm going to agree with you, Trip. You look at Coastal Carolina last year. They were outgaining opponents by 155 yards per game. They were outscoring opponents by 19 points per game. This year, they only have one loss. That came to Old Dominion. But they're only outgaining opponents by 22 yards per game. And they're only outscoring them by 5 points per game. It's been a much different season for Coastal. And the reason is they have hardly anybody left from that team. They lost the majority of the team. They have the least experienced team in college football. And while App had a few hiccups, blowing that 28-3 lead against James Madison, losing to Texas State on the road. They've started to get back to the App State that you would expect. They're playing really good defense, holding opponents 50 yards below their season average. And offensively, Chase Bryce is not making mistakes. He's got a 22-4 ratio. The run game has got going. They're averaging 6.1 yards per carry the last 4 weeks. Add it all up, I do like App to go on the road and get the win here, and I do feel they're the better team.
Coastal getting 3 at home. That's a 7:30 game on ESPN. App has won 4 of 5 straight up against Coastal as Sunbelt opponents. And yeah, the shots beating Marshall last week while getting outgained 407 to 271. Certainly a little suspect there. I want to take you to Chestnut Hill, Phil. Duke playing at Boston College, a 7 o'clock game on ESPN2. Tripp, is this line right that you put in here? -10? Blue Devils are now favored by 10. Are they? That is not correct. I think it's 3 or 4.
10.
The last
it's
check
10.
I had.
No, it's 10.
Yeah.
Holy smokes, that thing has shot up quite a bit. 10 points for the Blue Devils. They are favored by 47, the over-under, 7 o'clock Friday on ESPN2. So my first thought is to load up on BC, right? But they're coming off a loss against UConn, so I have no idea what to do with this one, Phil.
I like BC plus the points. You know, this is the first time Duke has been a double-digit favorite on the road in the ACC since 1994. Practically 30 years ago was the last time Duke rated this kind of merit, a double-digit road favorite. And overall, Duke on the road is not a great team. They're just 2-11 against the spread their last 13 games on the road. Now, you got to like the way they're playing, but they are coming off somewhat of a misleading final. They beat Miami of Florida 45-21, but they actually trailed that thing 21-17 in the third quarter. Miami's starting quarterback went out. They were +6 in turnovers. They benefited from 8 Miami turnovers. So I think you're looking at a Duke team that may be a little overrated at this point, and going on the road, laying this much against a Boston College team that's 12-5 against the spread at home. Now, I'm not pleased with Boston College's offense, and it all goes to that offensive line. They lost all 5 starters, and now they're banged up on the offensive line. They're only averaging 69 yards per game on the ground, 2.3 yards per carry, and have allowed 29 sacks. But this is a circle the wagons game. You're at home. Duke is in rarefied air here, being a double-digit away favorite. I like BC plus the points at home.
All right. Well, hey, I'm not too worried about Duke. I've got a better game coming up on Friday night, and that's the one that everybody's been waiting on all year. It's UMass at UConn. Big-time college football matchup. But seriously, what are we going to do here? UConn is laying 15.5. I mean, gulp. That's a lot of points for UConn football to be laying, but UMass is just a train wreck, so I don't know. What do you think here, Phil? Are they going to be able to cover that?
You know, I actually lean with Connecticut minus the points here for this reason. If you take a look at UMass, their season has been a struggle, as you would expect. You know, Don Brown stepped into a not-so-great situation, didn't have the type of talent that he wanted there. They've won only 1 game this year. That came against Stony Brook last week. As Kyle had, New Mexico State, they lost at home to New Mexico State by 10. On the season, just 1 win, and they're being outgained by 134 yards per game. But Connecticut, very sneaky this year. I think they only have 2 spread losses all year. Jim Moore is doing a great job. And look at their last 4 games. They beat Fresno State by 5 at home. They went into Florida International and came out of there with a 21-point win. Only lost to Ball State by 4 and had that game at one point. It looked like they were going to win it. And last week, that Boston College team we just talked about, they beat them by 10 at home. So this is now a Connecticut team. You may see these guys in a bowl game. They've got 4 wins already. They're trying for 5 and 6. So they're playing with a lot of enthusiasm. They're at home. They may draw an actual crowd for this one. I like Connecticut minus the points over UMass. I feel they're the better team and playing with some enthusiasm.
Well, hey, I think me and Kyle were just talking about this before the show. They're knocking on the door of the college football playoff, the gambling college football playoff. If you just take teams that are really good against the spread, I think they're right up there with maybe 5th in the country or something like that this year.
Yeah,
6-1-1 or 6-2, something like that. 7-2.
Yes.
Yeah, they've been great ATS. So, yeah, let's roll with UConn. I like it.
Trip, just point up if you need more volume on me, okay? I don't know if I can go any
Well,
louder,
I
but
still need
okay,
more from
all
you.
right. Well, we'll continue to pump that up. UConn 2 wins away from bowl eligibility. Duke, meanwhile, just 1. I wasn't going crazy, Phil. That line started at 3. The Blue Devils favored behind Chestnut Hill, so that has ballooned all the way up to 9.5, close
No,
to
it,
10.
it really did make that kind of a jump. I looked at the lines first thing Monday, and they were about 9.5 point favorites. So I think
Okay,
your opening line you're looking at is false.
Yeah,
okay.
we may have had it down wrong on the doc because I'm seeing 9.5 is where it opens. So maybe we just made a typo there.
All good. I blame the Action Network, everything. Oregon
Good.
State at Washington, -4.5. The Huskies are favorite at home. 54.5 is the total. 10:30 on ESPN2. The Beavers broke a 9-game losing streak against the Huskies when these two met last year, Phil.
Yeah, and I think two keys. Number one, as you mentioned, Washington dominated the series, playing with a legitimate revenge here, and also both teams have great home field edges. In fact, Oregon State, I believe, is now 10-1 against the spread, or 10-1 straight up, 11-0 against the spread at home. However, on the road, not so much. They lost at Utah, didn't cover against Stanford this year, and barely got a cover against Fresno State. So they're a different team, home and away. Washington is a team that is much better at home, and their 2 losses this year were both on the road. Husky Stadium is going to be extremely loud, so I think you have a team playing with revenge at home. I heard the weather could be a factor here. If the weather's a big time factor, like Steven was pointing out on the Tuesday podcast or the Wednesday podcast, then Oregon State has the advantage in the fact that they run the football better than Washington does. But as long as the weather's not a complete deluge, if it's just a little bit of rain or rain, I like Washington at home to get this one.
Let's go to the weekend, Phil. High noon window, early window of games. We've got to start with Air Force and Army. Service Academy matchup. The Black Knights are getting 7.5. 40.5 is the total. 11:30 games. So this will start before anything else on Saturday. CBS game and Trip. Those Service Academy unders. That's kind of an auto play for you, right?
Absolutely. That's an autoplay. Anytime the service academies play each other, I forgot, but I heard the number earlier. It's something like 40-9 over the last 50 something games. I mean, it's pretty much an automatic lock to take the under when the service academies play each other.
Yeah, and it's something that I've been using for years. You go back, and the beautiful thing about Phil Steele Plus, as you can see here, is it does give you the totals on each game. And the Army Navy game, look here, all straight unders. And here, Air Force Army, all unders the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And if you click on Air Force against Navy, you will see unders. There has actually been 2 overs in that series, but it's under. And now there is a clear reason why these games go under, and that is that the option is the benefit for teams that aren't as talented as other ones. It's tough to prepare for the option on a weekly basis. You only have 1 week to do it. You don't run the option in your normal practice, and you can't duplicate the speed of the option. So that's the advantage of the option versus a normal team. However, Army, Air Force, Navy all practice against the option all the time. They're very familiar with it. They can practice against the option at full speed, and we see a lot of low scoring games. And that's exactly where I'm headed in this one. You take a look at the series histories we just showed, all unders, and also the underdog has covered 6 in a row. If you look here, a favorite, and once again, if it's in red out here and it's a favorite, they're 0-4, and you can see the 2 dogs were covers. So the underdog has covered 6 in a row. If you like Army, there's been 4 upsets. I love this column here. It tells you if it's an upset series. 4 columns in the last 6 meetings and all unders. So unders my best play in this one, but I also like Army plus the points, despite the fact Air Force is playing so much better. I mean, the average game grades have Air Force at 100, Army at 89. The game's in Arlington. It's a neutral site, so that would favor Air Force by about 11. But I'm going to go with under in this one as my top play, and also throw in Army.
Army has won 4 of 5 straight up and against the spread, 2 against Air Force after losing 25 of 28. The unders have hidden those Service Academy matchups in 9 straight. You just saw Phil showing you Phil Steele Plus, sharing his screen. Make sure you go online, philsteele.com, for more information. All the advanced analytics, the team pages for all the FBS teams, FCS teams, even all 32 NFL teams is out there. Advanced game grades, individual stats, efficiency ratings, all of that and more can be found at philsteele.com. That's Phil Steele Plus, valued at $99. Interact with us at CS Now Tweets to increase, again, your odds to be a free winner to a subscription for next season.
All right, next up, we've got Ohio State on the road at Northwestern, who's still looking for their first win on American soil this year, believe it or not. After that win over Nebraska in the opener, they haven't been able to duplicate that. Now, it's a big number on this one, 38.5. Thank God Ohio State didn't cover last week. That was such a roller coaster. That was one of the few games I was on the right side of. And look, Coach Fitzgerald for Northwestern, I heard him quote, he said that they haven't cut the grass in like a month up there at their stadium. So he expects it to be between 2 and 4 foot tall when Ohio State comes to town. So, hey, maybe that's going to lean a little towards the under. What do you think on this one, Phil?
Yeah, well, it's tough to pick an Ohio State game under with that offense. As you saw last week against Penn State, Penn State actually led that game with 9 minutes to go in the game. Penn State's leading 21-16. And all of a sudden, as you touched on, Ohio State's up 44-24 with minute 12 to go in the game, and Penn State comes back and gets a cover. But that was a clear Penn State game. I mean, if you're over a 2 touchdown dog and you're winning the game with 9 minutes to go, you deserve the cover, and Penn State did. In fact, Penn State actually outgained Ohio State 482-452 last week. That's a number that probably wasn't expected. So I do think the grass will help Northwestern. Keep in mind, though, when Ohio State plays at Northwestern, if you look at the crowd, it's probably about 60, 65, 70% Ohio State fans. So it sort of takes away the home field advantage Northwestern normally has. Northwestern is a team that has struggled this year, but remember, they did outgain Duke, Southern Illinois, Miami of Ohio. They stayed close with Penn State. They stayed close with Maryland. In fact, Maryland got a 80-yard touchdown run at the end of the game to win that one by 7. And then they were throttled by Iowa in their last game. So I personally have no real interest in this game because Ohio State will have the crowd edge. Northwestern will have the grass edge. And if Ohio State had a big game on deck, I might like Northwestern here, but they only have Indiana on deck. So it's tough, and Ohio State can score in a hurry.
Let's head west just a tad to Tulsa, where the 19th ranked team in the land, according to the latest first ascent of the college football playoff rankings, is Tulane. Green Wave are given 7.5. 57 is the total. 12 o'clock on ESPNU. Tulane is 7-1 ATS this year. They and Tennessee are the number one teams. Their ATS records on the year. Again, UConn, we mentioned, was at 7-2. So the Wave, the highest ranked group of 5 team. UCF checks in behind them at 25. Green Wave and the Golden Hurricane. Phil, what do you think of this noon matchup Saturday?
Yeah, and as bad as Tulsa looked last week against SMU, I think we're going to see a better Tulsa this week. Remember Davis Brin after 3 weeks this year. Davis Brin was leading the nation in passing, and then he got injured in a game against Mississippi and hasn't quite been the same since. I think he'll get better, closer to form this game here against Tulane, even though Tulane does have an excellent defense, as you touched on, giving up just 314 yards per game. But here's a couple of numbers to throw at you. With Tulsa, they are 5-2 against the spread as a home dog, but Montgomery overall 21-8 as a dog is 7+, and he has actually covered 12 of the last 13 as a dog of 7+, and they're getting over a touchdown here. They're at home. Tulane's now starting to get attention, so they may be a little bit different, maybe reading the press clippings a little bit. As impressive as Tulane has been this year, I actually like Tulsa plus the points in this one.
All right. Well, as scary as this might sound for you, Tulsa has made their way into the teaser this week. I don't know why I should. I guess I kind of have to do one every week at this point now, but try to rebound from last week. But Tulsa's in there. So next up in the noon slate, we've got Iowa at Purdue. Purdue's laying 4.5. The over/under is sitting at 40.5. You want to talk about a scary streak? I've got one for you. Iowa, their last 2 games, it's gone over. Purdue, their last 3 games have gone over. I know we like to play the streak, but this is a pretty scary one here, Phil. Are you going to do it?
You know, I can see the over, and let me point out the reason why. If you go to Phil Steele Plus and you let me look for where it's at here. Let's go to the home page, team pages. Right here. Okay, we're going to click on the Phil Steele Plus menu. I want to take a look at the defenses that Iowa has faced this year. Now, in the opening game of the season, they played South Dakota State. And as Kyle has pointed out, we have, if you click back on the FCS team pages, we can click right here on any FCS team. You'll become an instant expert. You get the complete forecast. You get basically a magazine on every single FCS team. But look at South Dakota's defense this year. They're giving up 261 yards per game. So even though it was South Dakota and it was the opener, or South Dakota State, excuse me, South Dakota State, keep in mind, beat North Dakota State. They are one of the top teams in the FCS. But let's look at the rest of Iowa's opponents this year. They played Iowa State. And if we go to the Phil Steele Plus menu here, which I'm having a tough time getting to, there it is. And we're going to take a look at the defensive YPP defense. They played Iowa State. Iowa State has got the number right up here at the top. Defensive yards per play. You guys see Iowa State there? They got to be right at the top. Oh, here they are. They're number 19, so top 20. They played Nevada, which is weak. They played Rutgers. Rutgers is right here at number 15. They played Michigan. Michigan's up here at number 4. They played Illinois. Illinois is number 1. They played Ohio State. Ohio State is number 9. And then they finally played Northwestern down here. And Northwestern is towards the bottom of the ratings. They're number 96. And look what happened. They had 393 yards, 33 points. This week, they're taking on Purdue. And where do we find Purdue in this mix here? Let's see where we can find Purdue. They're number 91. So it should be an offensive performance, much like last week. They're no longer taking on a top 20 defense. They're taking on a defense similar to what Northwestern has, and that's an advantage to Iowa. And if you like Iowa in this game, keep in mind Purdue is 4-11 against the spread as a home favorite. And here's an interesting stat for you. Jeff Brom, the last 16 times he's been a home favorite, he's 8-8 straight up. That means 8 straight up losses as a home favorite. So you've got a really good dog in Iowa that's 5-2-1 against the spread as an away dog. You've got a really poor home favorite in Purdue, and you've got Iowa taking a step down from all those great defenses they played this year to taking on a manageable defense. I like Iowa plus the points, and I could see the over in that one.
Yeah, I think all signs, the arrow is pointing in the direction, possibly too, if you're going to take a side, to Iowa. I mean, the visitor also has won 11 of 12 ATS since 2008 in this series. So when you mentioned Jeff Brom struggles as a home favorite. So that's Iowa at Purdue. I want to pitch it over to Kentucky at Missouri. Let's go to Como. Tigers, 1-point underdogs, 40 the over-under, 12 o'clock, SEC Network. This is the final road game of the year in the SEC for Kentucky. They've only beaten Vanderbilt in that spot since 2009. So in the Wildcats, Phil got beat down handedly, 44-6. Was that the final against Tennessee? I mean, it wasn't even close. It was embarrassing if you're Mark Stoops in Kentucky.
Yeah, and Kyle, you threw that stat out, and I said, I wonder if that stat's correct. Is the visitor really 12-1 against the spread? So you look right here, and you could see that if the word is win, that means the home team won the game straight up. But if it's red, that means that the home team lost the game against the spread. So Kyle's right on the number there. 12-1 against the spread for the visitor, a visitor dominated series. Nice job there, Kyle. Now we'll take a look at the Missouri-Kentucky game. And I think we mentioned this last week. I'm not sure if we did, but I love the Missouri defense. And you go back to last year's defense with Missouri. Look at all this red right here on the defensive side of the ball. The beautiful thing about Phil Steele Plus, it color codes everything in green and red. You see it was nothing but red. And at this point in the season, they were giving up like 6.5 yards per carry. They were giving up over 500 yards per game. They couldn't stop the run, couldn't stop the pass. They fired their defense coordinator, made a change down the stretch. In the last 4 games, they gave up just 335 yards per game. And the Phil Steele Plus does tell you how a team's doing the last 4 games, good current form. And they were also holding opponents to 75 yards per game below their season average. So while the defense was horrific last year, they were really good the final 4 games. And that's continued this year. If you look at them defensively, they're giving up on the season just 309 yards per game on defense. And they're holding opponents to 111 yards per game below their season average, which is number 7 in the entire country. It's a very good defense. Now, Kentucky's got a good defense as well, holding opponents to 103 below their season average. The offenses are close, Both are below average, but Missouri's at home, catching Kentucky off a big game, catching Kentucky on a second straight road trip as well. I like Missouri plus the 1.5 in this one over Kentucky, and I really like Missouri's defense.
Yeah, that was a great call last week on Missouri and the under. That was really a no sweat game right there against South Carolina. And let's see, moving on, what have we got next? Texas Tech at TCU, another noon kick. Look, at first glance, I like Texas Tech in the points, 9.5, but I'm just done picking against TCU this year. It's one of those things. I think you were like that with UCLA earlier in the year, Phil, but they've burned me for 3 weeks in a row now. I think I had Oklahoma State on the money line. I had K-State. I had West Virginia. That had to have been the worst beat of the week last week. Just absolutely brutal. Yeah. Great for people who had the over, though. Not so much for me, though. But these two teams, like I said, I'm not picking against TCU again, but the number 69.5, what do you think about that? Is there any value? Do you like one side or the other here?
Yeah, first of all, let's talk about the West Virginia game and what Tripp's talking about. 20 seconds to go in the game. TCU's just trying to run out the clock. It's 4th and 1. They're at the 29-yard line. So even if they get a first down, it's take a knee. They probably don't even have to take a knee. Once they reset the change, the clock just runs out. The game is over. I'm about to mark win on the sheet here, and not yet, though. I'm waiting. And all of a sudden, a player jumps offside, so the quarterback says, you know what, I'm going to throw to the end zone. He throws to the 2-yard line, catches it, breaks a tackle, gets in the end zone, and all of a sudden, a sure win for West Virginia turns into a loss on a 29-yard touchdown pass, which TCU shouldn't have been thrown in the first place. Had he taken a knee on the offsides, the game would have been over as well. You almost wish in that situation they would have returned an interception for a touchdown, taught him a lesson. But anyway, let's go back to this game. And the one thing I'm looking at is Texas Tech's a different team at home than on the road. Now, last week they got smoked at home, but prior to that, they were unbeaten at home. They were 0-3 straight up and against the spread on the road. And this is a TCU. They've got a rabbit foot in their pocket. I think it might be much like Michigan State last year. Remember, Michigan State was so lucky in so many games, and they somehow went 11-2 and finished in the top 10 when they really weren't that good. You go back to the Kansas State game where TCU is getting dominated by Kansas State. Kansas State loses their starting quarterback, their backup quarterback, they're down to their third-string quarterback, and they really struggled in the second half. I'm not going against TCU either. So if I was picking this game, to me the best play is probably either the over or I'm going to decide with TCU this week. There are games coming up where I'm going to pick against TCU, but I'm going to wait till they actually lose one.
Rabbit foot in his pocket. I love that, Phil. For the sake of time, I do want to get one more in the noon window, but we'll skip Georgia Tech at Virginia Tech. The Hokies are favored by 3 in that one. That's 12:30 on ESPN3. The visitor has won 7 of 8, covered 9 of 10 if you want to nugget on that particular matchup. But Western Kentucky on the road, a 16-point favorite, 72 the over-under at Charlotte, 12 o'clock on CBS Sports Network. As we alluded to earlier in the program, Phil, the Pete Rosamondo bump for Charlotte as they exploded for 56 points at Rice last week. Can they sustain that, keep it within the 16 against the Hilltoppers at Jerry Richardson Stadium?
Yeah, they've had a couple of games this year where they've done well on the offensive side of the ball, and a lot of it is with Chris Reynolds as the quarterback. We take a look at the individual player stats, and when you look there, you see Chris Reynolds started the first game of the season. They got injured against Florida Atlantic. He missed the William and Mary game, missed the Maryland game, and they really struggled. Then he returned against Georgia State. And look at this, 31 of 43 for 401 yards. Didn't do so well at South Carolina, but they've got a pretty good defense. UTEP threw for 335. UAB, which has a really good defense, threw for 214, 244 against FIU, and then 254 last week with 5 touchdown passes. So they do have an underrated quarterback in Chris Reynolds, who missed these 2 games here. And I think they finally started living up to the potential that you thought they might have at the start of the year. Also, let's take a look at how they got 239 yards rushing last week. It was a cumulative, guys. There was 3 of them. Bird was the top guy with 83 yards. Now, Western Kentucky can put points on the board. Look at the red on this Charlotte defense. They are pure red, so Western Kentucky will score. I think Charlotte can score. Probably your best play here, even though the number's high. You got to like the total. I think both teams will be able to score. And Western Kentucky, as you know, has a high-flying offense that's struggled a little bit the last 2 weeks, although they put up numbers like 466 yards. They only had 13 points last week. So I'd probably lean with the over in this one.
Okay, Phil, time for the meat of the sandwich. All eyes, all ears. all attention will be directed on one spot in particular at 3:30, and that'll be Sanford Stadium, where between the hedges, Georgia has won 16 in a row. They come in as the third-rated team according to the College Football Playoff rankings. Tennessee getting that #1 bump, thanks to the 13-person selection committee in their first release on Tuesday night. So #1 Tennessee playing at third-ranked Georgia. Bulldogs have won the last 5 over Tennessee by an average of 28 points per game. I don't think that's going to happen this weekend. Georgia is favored by 8, 65.5, the over-under, 3:30 on CBS, Phil.
Yeah, and keep in mind, Bama had beaten Tennessee, 16 straight times prior to their meeting, and Tennessee finally broke through and got that one. And this game sort of reminds me, go back a long time ago, Sports Illustrated had a cover when Oklahoma was playing Nebraska, and it was irresistible force meets immovable object. Well, here we've got the #1 offense in the country in Tennessee. They're putting up 162 yards per game above what your opponents normally allow. They're taking on the #1 defense in the country in Georgia, holding opponents to 140 yards per game below what opponents normally gain. So we've got a great matchup here. Tennessee sort of reminds me a little bit of LSU a couple years ago, where they can score on anybody. I love the 567 yards, 52 points they put on Bama, but Georgia's at home. They're at Sanford Stadium. They've got this series, and the one guy we're not talking about is Stetson Bennett. I think Stetson Bennett's got right where he wants to be for this game. No one's talking about him. He could step out and have a big game against the Tennessee defense that's given up 453, 455, and 316 passing in 3 different games. So I think it's going to be a great game. I personally had the line at 7. I would favor Georgia by 7. Since it's over 7, I like Tennessee plus the points, but I do feel that Georgia will come out of there with the win.
No Nolan Smith, Georgia having to retool a little bit on the defensive side of the ball, but we know they're stacked with guys who are going to play on Sunday regardless. So I do like Tennessee first half team total over 13.5. There's a prop for you. Maybe they get their best punch early on in terms of going over that total. So that could be something to look at. First half team total over 13.5 for Tennessee based on the amount of scoring. #1 ranked scoring offense in the country. That could be a safe play. We'll stay in SEC country, but only half of it represented, or both, depending on how you look at it, as Hugh Freeze returns to SEC country to Fayetteville. 23rd ranked Liberty. Hugh with a new contract, 13.5-point underdogs. Phil, I gave you a stone cold lock. You were on board with me. Louisville as an outright dog at home against Wake Forest last week. I think Liberty is the team that can keep it inside 13.5 more so than anybody else this weekend. I like the storyline of Hugh Freeze coming back to the SEC. It's a 4 o'clock game on the SEC network. What do you think of the Flames being perfect and mistake-free here this weekend, Phil?
Yeah, I think they clearly have a shot in the game. I think when you go back and take a look at Arkansas this year, they struggled against Missouri State earlier. Remember Bobby Petrino's return. In fact, they trailed that game in the 3rd quarter, ended up winning it. They've come off 2 very impressive wins. The Auburn one was big. They got a big game next week. It's LSU coming to home. So this is clearly a sandwich spot for Arkansas this week. And their defense, the last 4 weeks, given up 516 yards per game, 319 yards per game passing. Now, Liberty, Arkansas beat BYU 2 weeks ago, 52-35, and you thought, wow, that's impressive. Guess what? Liberty beat that same BYU team 41-14. And they've done so despite the fact they've had some quarterback injuries. Jonathan Bennett returned at the quarterback spot a couple weeks ago, and he's rounding into form. I thought Caden Salter was an outstanding QB form when he was there, but he then got injured. And they've had a couple games playing without their quarterback. So they took Wake Forest within 1 on the road. I think they can stay within the points on Arkansas. So I'm going to agree with you there. I like Liberty plus the points, especially in a sandwich spot for Arkansas.
Phil, do you think we can get some odds on if Hugh Freeze is going to be there at the end of that 8 years? Do you think he's still in Lynchburg, Virginia in 2030?
2030? No, I wouldn't think so.
8-year contract extension, supposed to pay roughly $5 million a year through 2030 for Hugh Freeze. So Auburn's open now.
Yeah, lots of names swirling around. I'm hearing a lot of chatter about Deion Sanders might be on his way to Auburn.
First thing you said to me today, Phil, was Deion's already getting on a jet. All right, he's already rummaging through the chat boards, looking at the Auburn folks. So between Lane Kiffin, Hugh Freeze, Deion Sanders, I mean, who else can we clump into that one? Trip, are your Pokes going to be able to get right after getting blown out 48-0 this past weekend? This is almost a pick 'em. 1-point underdog at Kansas, who's off a bye, 3:30 on Fox Sports 1.
Yeah, they're completely off my radar now. No more Oklahoma State. They burned me too many times, so they're in jail right now. They're in timeout. So I'm laying off them. But the other team here, Kansas, you talk another team that's on the doorstep, or I think they would actually be fourth right now in the gambling football playoff. Like they're the fourth best team in the country against the spread. So who knows?
Yeah, and part of the reason they've done so well against the spread is Jalen Daniels, their quarterback, and there's a chance he could return this week. In fact, odds are he will return, which is why I think the spread's so reasonable on this game. Now, if you take a look at the series history, it is all Oklahoma State. And they not only win the games, they win the games by huge margins. They've had one loss, it was back in 2007. Other than that, every game has pretty much been almost by double digits every year. Oklahoma State thoroughly dominates. Now, their quarterback situation, if you look at Oklahoma State last week, Sanders was banged up. Gunnar Gundy took over, but they've also got another guy on there in Garrett Rangel who could very well see some action. In fact, he's been taking snaps in practice this week. So is Gundy. Both last week took the snaps with the second team offense. This week they've been taking it with the first team offense. So I think they're in better shape if Sanders isn't able to play. Sanders will make the trip, will travel. But I just think Oklahoma State's a better team. They went into Baylor, came out of there with a win. The TCU game was a game they had in control. They led that thing by 17 and lost. They beat Texas at home. That's a pretty good victory as well. And then last week was just one of those games you can't explain. And I love the fact they're off a shutout loss and now an underdog to a Kansas team they've beaten a gazillion straight times. And Kansas, you go back and take a look at that Oklahoma game. They were like down 17-24 and came back and only lost by 10. Baylor completely dominated them. They had a 28-3 edge in that game, and then a crucial fumble return down to the 1 yard line really got Kansas back in the game. But Baylor had a 437, 288-yard edge. So add it all up, I like Oklahoma State +1 over Kansas. And well, who would have been jumping on this at the start of the year if we could get Oklahoma State +1?
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, that's a fact, but just out of principle, I think I have to leave the Cowboys in timeout for a week after what they've done to me the last couple of weeks. But staying in the Big 12, I think the next game on the list here, West Virginia at Iowa State, another two teams that should be in timeout. Look, I don't really know how much of West Virginia's fault that was. The last little scene there in Morgantown last week. I know, I'm shaking my head too. It was brutal. But I think you may have liked Iowa State last week too, Phil, against Oklahoma. I can't remember what your lean was on that. But anyways, the matchup, 7.5-point favorite, Iowa State. Looks like 50.5 is the total. Maybe the under here. I don't know. I don't really have a lean either way. What do you see in this one?
Yeah, I like Iowa State -7. And you go back and take a look at Iowa State. It's just been an excruciating year for Matt Campbell. We talked about how some teams are lucky. They've got the rabbit's foot in their pocket. It's been just the opposite for Iowa State. 7-point loss to Baylor. 3-point loss to Kansas, where you missed 3 field goals, including a game tying at the end. Kansas State, a 1-point loss, a game they could easily have won. Texas, a 3-point loss, where they had a 403 to 363 yard edge, and that was on the road. And then Oklahoma last week, they had a 373 to 332 yard edge, 42-yard edge in the game, and they lost. This is a team that in Big 12 play is plus 12 yards per game, yet they're 0-5. It's the exact opposite of what Michigan State was last year. Michigan State was minus 62 yards per game in Big 10 play, but won almost all their games. Iowa State's plus yards per game, and yet they're 0-5. And then you look at West Virginia. They've really struggled on the road. They got beat by Texas by 18. They got beat by Texas Tech by 38. Their defense is the opposite of Iowa State, whereas Iowa State's holding opponents to 134 yards per game below their season average, which is number 3 in the country. West Virginia's defense is allowing foes the last 4 weeks 531 yards per game. So they're giving up a boatload of yards, both rushing, passing, and I just think Iowa State's a better team at home. West Virginia struggles on the road. I like Iowa State -7 in this one.
Phil, did you hear Tripp just a few moments ago trying to coin a new term, a new process? What was it, the gambling playoff rankings?
Yeah,
Was
we
it
got to come up
EPR?
with something. It's the gambling college football ranking or the covering
Let's put a
college
new.
football blanket.
We should operate by a different system, right? Put a different number by every team's name. So Tulane and Tennessee would each be number 1. 25th would be UCF. We'd have Southern Miss in the top 10. We'd have Wake Forest still hanging around the top 10. Georgia Southern, a top 15 team. Troy, Kansas State, James Madison. I mean, that would be bonkers. I mean, these are the teams that are winning us money. We're more focused on them.
Yeah, and you can actually like seed them by what teams cover by the most. So you've got Tennessee covering by 10.4 points per game at 7-1. They're just ahead of Tulane, which would be number 2. Then the 2-3 matchup would be Tulane against TCU. They're 6-1-1, covering by an average of 7.8, just ahead of Kansas, who's covering by an average of, I'm not wearing my glasses, maybe 5.4 or something like that.
That's okay. That's your homework trip, okay? You flush that out. You map it out. You give us a new set of rankings. Phil, what is it you're looking to whip up for us here? You got some, you're going deep into the archives.
These are the logs that are on Phil Steele Plus. And so you could have the spread on every game. This gives you the wins and losses, spread record up here, total on the game. And, you know, we not only have it for the FBS or FBS, we have it for the NFL. So you could follow along. You could see the teams that are winning games against the spread. Let's see how your beloved Bears are doing this year. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3, and 1 against the spread so far this season for the Bears. And then how about this? Nobody's got this. FCS logs. There are some teams in the FCS that are doing extremely well against the spread. How about Mercer? You'd love this team, Tripp. Look at all these W's here in the column for Mercer. They've only had 1 loss to Chattanooga. You can see all this at a glance. It's right there in the spread logs on Phil Steele Plus.
Don't tempt him with a good time, Phil. He's going to become. He's going to walk into here.
I'll be all over it.
He's going to have a Mercer T-shirt this time next week. Again, all the information you see right there when Phil shares the screen. If you're with us live, Thursdays 1 o'clock at CS Now Tweets. Every team, every game, all the team pages. That's Phil Steele Plus. So go to philsteele.com for more information. Updated player stats, start charts, last 45 plus years of results. 20 years worth of leaders, draft history, spread numbers. It's all there. Phil Steele Plus is certainly going to be the biggest resource for you moving forward. So thank us later. Bet smarter, not harder with Phil Steele Plus. One more maybe for the midday before we get to a couple of the big boys in the evening, and then Phil's going to have his top plays and we're out of here. I want to touch on Washington State because they have won 5 straight against the spread and straight up against Stanford. They are struggling, though, recently, as has Stanford all year. Stanford does have the big win in South Bend over Notre Dame. But if you're Wazoo, you're 4.5-point favorite, Phil. 50.5 is the total. 330 on the Pac-12 network. Only one win each for either side in the Pac-12. I mean, something's got to give here. And I like the Cougs in this matchup going to the farm.
Yeah, and I'm going to lean with Stanford. Washington State this year has had a couple of games. You go back to the Wisconsin game, they're out first down 22-10. You go back to the Oregon game, Oregon settled for a lot of field goals, gave up the dreaded 14-point turnaround and the 95-yard fumble return for a touchdown. At the end of the game, Oregon had a 624 to 340-yard edge on them, and then they went down and scored a touchdown, I believe, with no time left on the clock. Lost to USC, Oregon State, and last week against Utah, against a backup quarterback, they trailed 17-7. Or 21-7. They got 2 late scores to make it a 21-17 game. Their offense only had 264 yards. In fact, the last 4 weeks, they're only putting up 341 yards per game. Stanford, a little banged up at running back. Well, very banged up at running back, but they still have Tanner McKee. They beat Arizona State at home. They went into Notre Dame, came out of there at the win. They should have beaten Oregon State. They were winning by 14 or 13 points in the fourth quarter, 14 points. And I gave up that long pass at the end of the game, somehow lost that one. A down effort last week against UCLA, but I think they bounced back at home. I like Stanford plus the points to pull the upset.
Okay. All right. Here we go. The night games, and it's a good one to kick it off. We've got Alabama on the road at LSU. Looks like 13.5 the Crimson Tide are laying right now. And look, I know you've got computers and calculators that are grinding over these lines all week, Phil, but to me, LSU seems like they're on a pretty good track here with Brian Kelly at home at night. I mean, the average better. I want to kind of take LSU here with the points. What do you think?
Yeah, I think LSU looks like the play in this game. First of all, let's look at Alabama on the road, and not just this year. Last year they went into Florida, struggled, only won the game by 2, so needed to stop a 2-point conversion. Lost to Texas A&M, should have lost to Auburn. Had Bigsby not run out of bounds, they would have lost to Auburn last year. This year, they go into Texas, very fortunate to come out of there with a 1-point win thanks to Texas quarterback injuries and a missed field goal. The Arkansas game was good, but then Tennessee, they lose outright. So this is an Alabama team that struggles on the road. LSU was not a great team at the start of the year. They trailed Florida State by 14, trailed Mississippi State by 13, trailed Auburn 17-0. Fortunate. They were outgained by 168 yards by Auburn, blown out by Tennessee. But the last 2 weeks, Jaden Daniels and that offense have been rolling. Florida, they forced, I think, 1 punt all game. It was all LSU's offense. And Ole Miss actually led that thing 17-3. And then LSU just absolutely dominated the rest of the game. So it's an offense that's rolling. Death Valley at night versus a poor team on the road. I got to like LSU plus the 13.5 here. I agree with you, Tripp.
Oh, I love it. These two every time. My first year living in Baton Rougeville, I was able to take in an Alabama LSU game, and let me tell you, 100,000 people screaming expletives towards Nick Saban, even with all the women and children in attendance. It was quite the experience. That was one of those overtime games that went Alabama's way. So LSU had just won for the first time in forever in 2019, the national championship year. So I do like LSU in that one. Certainly it's going to be among the more entertaining of the game, as Nick Saban's 2-0 against Brian Kelly. They've won 10 of 11 and covered 6 of 9 overall against LSU. The other one in South Bend, 5th-ranked Clemson returns to Notre Dame. Fighting Irish are getting 3.5, 44 the total, 7:30 on Peacock and NBC. Phil, I know you remember the last time Clemson took this trip just less than 2 years ago. It was during the COVID year. So it wasn't made out to be the trip for the Clemson folks maybe that they would have liked to have taken advantage of. They certainly are traveling in bunches for this one, regardless of whether Notre Dame is down or up. The Fighting Irish, I think they match up pretty well against Clemson, and it's not going to be a DJU team, I think, where he's going to come in and throw for 439 yards again.
Yeah, 439 yards last time it was in South Bend, but Notre Dame won that game. Amazing stat to me. Notre Dame has now won 26 straight games against ACC opponents, 26 in a row during the regular season. And they beat Clemson, as you mentioned, 2 years ago at home. Love the way Notre Dame's running the football. You go back and take a look at the last 4 weeks. They're running for 213 yards per game. They play great defense. They're holding opponents to 91 yards per game below their season average. And as good as Clemson's defensive front seven is, they haven't been as dominant as I thought they would be on defense this year, holding opponents to 66 yards per game below their season average. You know, DJU is a guy that could have a decent game here against Notre Dame, but that's a heck of a defense, one that held Ohio State to just 395 yards, one that's held a lot of opponents to season lows this year. So add it all up, I'm going to go with the home dog here. I like Notre Dame plus the points and a possible upset.
All right, guys, take me back to the days where Florida State and Miami used to decide who was going to go to a national championship game. We're not there this year, but they are playing this weekend down in Coral Gables. The Noles, a 7.5-point favorite right now. And I'll tell you something that Florida State, they've been really good at running the football this year. I think they're going to try to do that again Saturday. They might get Treshaun Ward back. I think Coach Norvell said he was trending towards playing. Miami, the one thing they kind of can do is stop the run a little bit, but they've been a mess this year, and I think this is a little bit of a fishy line here. I would expect Florida State to be favored by a little bit more, to be honest with you. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the rivalry might be factored into that a little bit. But how about the fact that, Tripp, you're the spread guy there. Miami's record against the spread in FBS games? How about 0-7? They haven't covered a game all year,
Yikes.
or 0-6-1. Depends what you got that Virginia game at last week. They were -2, and then it turned into -2.5 in some spots. So it could have been a push for them, but they haven't covered a game all season long. So that's one thing they got going against them. Tyler Van Dyke may return, but the defense, as you pointed out, good against the run. I think Florida State, when you look at my computer, loves this team. It's got them ranked the number 12 team in the country, an average game grade of 111.7. So the numbers would say Florida State, but it is a rivalry game. Miami's at home. I'm staying away from this one. It's and I have a feeling that a lot of TV sets, unlike back when it was in the heyday, I'll probably stay away from this one as well.
The second longest continuous rivalry in all of FBS since 1910. These two have played. Wake Forest at NC State. The Deacs are laying 454 is the total, 8 o'clock on ACC Network. Wake Forest 20th in the CFP rankings. The Wolfpack are 21. I think this is going to be an angry Demon Deacons team, Phil, after what happened to them at Louisville. Sam Hartman, a couple of pick sixes, a couple of strip sack fumbles, 6 turnovers in 1 quarter. NC State might have found a quarterback in comeback fashion as they trailed Virginia Tech 21-3 last week before coming back. MJ Morris looked really good. Touchdown throws on 3 consecutive drives. How do you see this one shaking out at Carter Finley on Saturday night?
Yeah, I was a little surprised at the number being over a field goal. I think if it was, pick 'em, I might lean with Wake Forest to win the game, but laying over a field goal on the road in Carter Finley Stadium is going to be tough. NC State clearly has the defensive advantage. They're holding opponents to 87 yards per game below their season average, number 15 in the country. Wake, meanwhile, is number 73 in the country on defense. So big edge defensively for NC State. And while they looked afraid to throw the football the last few weeks, as you touched on, down 21-3 against Virginia Tech, all of a sudden MJ Morris go throw the football, and they look pretty good. Ended up throwing for 296 yards against a decent Virginia Tech defense. So it's a Wake team that is definitely better than that final score last week. They do have the quarterback edge. I'll take Sam Hartman over most quarterbacks in the ACC. But defense, home dog, I'm going to lean with NC State plus the points in that one.
All right, when you're playing from behind, there's got to be an opportunity to get right, especially late on Saturday nights. Phil, you hit with Hawaii, 10.5-point dog against Wyoming last week. Our late night chasers. I want to go first to the desert and Tempe, 10th-ranked UCLA, given 11 points, 66 to total at Arizona State, 9:30 on FS1. UCLA has won 4 of 5 ATS and straight up against Sun Devils.
Yeah, and I think of the 3 games that are late night, this would be the one that I would use as to chase the whatever you need to chase at night. Arizona State last week against Colorado, they led that thing 42-20, gave up a garbage touchdown, then they gave up an 88-yard punt return touchdown. They put up 557 yards. I like the way that Burkett's throwing the football. He's taken over for Emory Jones as a starter. Xavier Valladay, if you remember back at the Wyoming days, is an outstanding running back, and Badger's doing well at the receiving corps. They've been playing much better football under their interim head coach, beat Washington here at home by 7, and now they get UCLA at home. UCLA, not much of a flat spot. I mean, they're only off Stanford. They only have Arizona on deck. But it is a road game for them. They've struggled a little bit on the road. I'd like Arizona State plus the points in the desert in that one. And that would be my top one of the 3 night games.
All right. Well, I like Fresno State late Saturday night. Jake Hayner's back. I know it's a big number. It was at 23.5, and now I think it's all the way up to 27.5. So I think this is a great spot to talk about where – I don't know how you handicap this, Phil, but what number are you comfortable with for Fresno State? Well, if you like them at all first, I guess we should start there.
Yeah, well, if you're going to use them teaser-wise, I can see that because it'd probably take it under – would it take it under 21 trip?
Would take it to 21.5 or 20.5. Yeah.
20.5. There you go. So under 3 touchdowns, I can deal with that, especially the fact that Hayner would be back. Keep in mind, last week, they actually trailed San Diego State 28-14, or no, 28 to well, anyway, they were down 11.
It was 28-10, and they got the most incredible onside kick you'll ever see at the end of that game.
Yeah, it's a miracle that they won the game against San Diego State. Let's go there. So good point there, Kyle. 2 late touchdowns did it, but now Hayner is his second game back. Should be better. I like this Hawaii team. I think they're playing a lot better football right now than they were at the start of the year when they were getting blown out. Brendan Shager is putting up some decent numbers. Parsons running the football okay, and the defense has been getting better. They've only allowed 380 yards per game the last 4. But I think if the number's less than 3 touchdowns, like you pointed out, Tripp, I would like Fresno State. I don't know about the 26.5, but I would like them at minus 20.5.
You've been doing it wrong if you haven't had a pen and paper out to this point or been typing away on your typewriter or your keyboard, taking all of these notes. Fortunately, it's in podcast form. So at CS Now Tweets or any of our video platforms, you want to go back and listen to us between now and any of these games on Saturday. Follow Phil at PhilSteele042. It's time for his power plays. He gave us Louisville, as did I last week. He's even got a special group of 5 play. We're not going to divulge that information here, but go back 1 episode in the College Sports Now podcast feed. Stephen Hartzell and Wayne Cook every single Wednesday morning that drops. Phil has a special nugget from the G5 ranks that will certainly help to line your pockets this weekend. So be sure to go back and listen to Hartzell and Cook. Phil, you're hot in that regard, 4 in a row with those guys. What can you provide us, though, this week with your top 3 plays?
Well, I'm going to pick 3 of the games that we've talked about so far. I talked about Notre Dame plus the 4 over Clemson. I do think that's a possible outright upset for the home dog. We talked about Iowa State. You've got the stronger team, much stronger defense at home against a team that struggles on the road. I like Iowa State minus the 7. And I also like Oklahoma State plus 1. I think there's a lot of value there. There's a lot of folks like Tripp, who want nothing to do with Oklahoma State after a 49-0 loss to Kansas State. That's generally the time to jump on a team. If you weren't burnt by them last week, jump on them this week. I'm going with Notre Dame, Iowa State, and Oklahoma State.
All right, I love it. I'm going to take LSU minus the 13 at home against Alabama. Liberty, as I told you, that's going to be my big underdog play. LSU, just as much, almost an equal underdog, but 13.5 for Liberty going into SEC country, taking on Arkansas, the 2 Freeze, taking on the Hogs, and then Air Force Army. I'm going to take that under. I'm going to go ahead and play it. I'm going to auto play the 40.5. We'll see how that pans out in Arlington. For you, Tripp, teaser. It didn't hit last week, right? But 2 weeks ago you were good. What are you going to conjure up some of that magic again this week?
Look, I owe the whole world an apology for last week, and I honestly knew it was doomed from the get-go because 2 weeks ago when I won, as I was giving out the picks, I saw Phil nodding his head up and down, giving me thumbs up. Last week, he just kind of sat there, so that scared me. I should have known it. Looking back, those were just some really, really awful picks, and I'm sorry for anybody that listens and actually took it. But this week, I'm a little worried. I think you're going to like the first 2, Phil, but let me know what you think on the second 2 because these are not in the books yet. All right, I've got Air Force Army. I'm teasing the under. So instead of 40.5, we just need to stay under 47.5. We mentioned Fresno already. If you tease them down, they need to cover 20.5. I like that offense with Jake Haener coming back. I think they're a different team. Tulsa, I think they're a sneaky pick this week. If you take them at 7.5, a 7-point teaser gets them up to 14.5. The one I'm worried about, Western Kentucky and Charlotte, I had this down as under. And if you tease it, it goes up to 79. What do you think, Phil? Would I be better off teasing it over?
I would probably tease that one over. What would that bring the number down to in that
65.
one? I haven't looked at the total. I was thinking over in that game originally. Western's been an under team the last 4 weeks. Was that part of your philosophy? That Western's gone under the last 5?
They've kind of got a reputation with a high-flying offense, but they have been kind of a little bit of an under team all season, really. I think they're maybe 3-6 on overs or something like that. But
it looks like their last 5 games. Now, Troy's got a really good defense. UAB's got a really good defense. North Texas doesn't, though. They've got an average defense. Charlotte's defense, though, is very poor. I think Charlotte's defense and Western Kentucky's offense on the same field, you got to think Western puts some points on the board. So I really don't have a play on that one way or the other, but I was originally leaning over. I'll give you that information.
All right, well, let's tease them over. They need to hit over 65.
Okay.
$100 bet will win you $225.
The Sickos are 8-2 after New Mexico State overcame a 10-0 deficit at UMass this past weekend. They went on to win 23-13. New Mexico State was 2.5-point favorite. This week, I'm going to go with Temple at home, 3.5-point dog, despite having one more win than USF. 51 is the total. I'm taking the Owls as the home underdog, 4-0 ATS at home. The Bulls' 4th worst scoring defense. Temple averaging among the worst in points per game at 15.5. I think it's going to be just the medicine for them, hopefully to get right. E.J. Warner, who completed only 50% of his passes, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions last week, threw 48 passes, completed almost 270 yards against Navy in an overtime game. So gave him a little bit of confidence. I like Temple to end a 4-game losing streak overall. USF 0-4, by the way, on the road. They've covered in 3 of those 4. But give me Temple, 3.5-point underdog at home against USF. That is our sicko for the week. PhilSteele.com, Phil Steele Plus, inside the press box, at PhilSteele042, and also Fridays on YouTube. Some more glimpses into how Phil Steele Plus can help you for the weekend. Right, Phil?
That's right. And to give you a little more ammunition on that play, Kyle, Temple on the road is giving up 448 yards per game. At home, they're allowing 289 yards per game. They play really good defense at home.
Two different teams. Two different teams. Phil, I'm going to be eating a lot of pancakes on Saturday with Sloan Martin, Mike Golick Jr. on college football Saturday night. Game of the week is Wake Forest at NC State. I'll be out at Big Ed's in Raleigh, 9 a.m. 3 1-pound pancakes. I have 45 minutes to do it. Wish me luck, okay? There will be video at Learfield Audio, at Kyle Shast, at CS Now Tweets. We'll make sure to repost that. So hopefully it gets you in the mood for a Week 10 in college football, okay, Phil?
Good luck to you on that, Kyle.
Thank you. Certainly this show will. At Phil Steele 042, at Trip Bird, I'm at Kyle Shast. That's it for Week 10, the Phil Steele Show. We will return next week, Thursdays, 1 o'clock